contract may not necessarily result in a breach of contract. So in other words, let's say you've tried your best to perform the contract and you've made a good faith effort to render full performance and there's only a slight defect in the performance. Is the contract still enforceable? And the answer is yes. We oftentimes see this with construction contracts. And so let's say you've entered into a contract to have your office building built and you've specified everything down to the light fixtures. And the contractor has performed their contract to the letter except that some of the light fixtures are no longer available and they find substitute light fixtures. Is the contract substantially performed? And the answer is yes. Is it still enforceable? The answer is yes. All right, so let's move on. Objective impossibility. If it's objectively impossible to complete the contract, then it can't be completed. So objective impossibility can occur when the subject matter of the contract has been destroyed. I've offered to sell you my house and the house burns to the ground. Or if the contract is now illegal. So let's say that's 1933 and I've entered into a contract to sell you rare gold coins. It's now illegal to possess those gold coins in 1933. And so the contract would be void and unenforceable. Or even if there's the death of a person necessary to complete the contract. So I gave you an example of, let's say that I am on the wait list for a grandfather clock made by Mr. Rosen in the Shenandoah Valley, and the wait list is 20 years long, and Mr. Rosen dies. What happens to my contract? Well, it can't be enforced because the person necessary to complete the contract is no longer here. Anyway, let's move on. So subjective impossibility, simply because it's more expensive or time-consuming to complete a contract does not mean it's destroyed. If you decide that you're going to go on and earn your MBA, chances are you will study the Westinghouse case because this is an infamous case. In this case, Westinghouse entered into long-term fixed-price contracts to sell yellow cake. That's a form of refined uranium to power plants across the United States for $8 to $10 a pound. These contracts were to last for 10 years in some cases. Well, anyway, the market price rose to $30 a pound, and Westinghouse had committed to supply 40,000 tons of yellow cake. And they said, it's now impossible for us to perform the contract. Is it? No. It's more expensive, but it's not impossible. Conditional contracts, I just wanted to point out that a valid contract may be conditioned upon either a condition precedent or a condition subsequent. And I've given you examples on this slide. Damages. Oftentimes contracts will contain a liquidated damages clause. In other words, in the event that there's a breach, this is how much the damages will be. So don't be surprised when you get out into the world of work and you see just that. In terms of money damages, you may have either compensatory damages, nominal damages, or punitive damages. Compensatory damages are intended to place the non-breaching party in the position they would have been in had there not been a breach of contract. And so they must be foreseeable, and the aggrieved party must mitigate damages if possible or make them less. Nominal damages are $1. So you've gone to court, you've proven that there's a breach of contract, but you don't have any damages. The court will award you $1. By the way, don't take that case to court. Punitive damages are rare, and they are intended to punish. So when we get to the McDonald's coffee case, we will talk about punitive damages. Now, specific performance. If you have a contract for something that's considered to be, the subject matter is considered to be unique, you may sue for specific performance or to force the other person to go through with the contract. So real estate is always considered to be unique. Antiques, artwork, something of sentimental value. You may not sue for specific performance and monetary damages, just one or the other. All right, so let's wrap up Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code. The good news is this, that most of the rules you already learned for contracts, common law contracts, also apply to the sale of goods. So the subject matter of Article 2 is goods, items of tangible personal property that you can pick up and move. Same elements, but we need to talk about a few changes under Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code. All right, so Article 2 applies. What if you have a contract for both the sale of goods and for the rendering of a service? Which law applies? Well, you look to see what's the main reason for the contract. Is the main reason for the sale of goods, or is it for the rendering of a service? All right, real quick example. Let's say you go into the a hair salon to have your hair dyed using expensive products. Is this the sale of goods, or is it the rendering of a service? Well, it's a rendering of a service, and the common law contract rules would apply. So you need to remember the test. That is, what's the main reason for the contract? All right, so here are the rules that are different under Article 2. All right, so offers. You know, under the common law contract rules that an offer may be revoked any time prior to it being accepted, with the exception of an option offer, also known as an option contract. All right, so under Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code, we have this thing called a firm offer. So if you have the sale of goods and by a merchant, someone who deals in goods of the kind, and he puts it in writing and he signs it, this is a firm offer and it is irrevocable for the period of time stated in the offer. We don't let these run for more than 3 months. Remember, it has to be signed and in writing. It does not have to be supported by consideration. Acceptance. I just want you to know that additional terms are more likely to become part of the contract if both parties are merchants and it's for the sale of goods, and the change is just a minor change. And then finally, with consideration, if both parties agree, modifications made to a contract for the sale of goods that are made in good faith are enforceable even without consideration. And finally, the missing term rule says this, that quantity must always be specified in a contract for the sale of goods. The exception being, of course, an output contract. I agree that I'm going to buy all of the output you can produce. Or a requirements contract, I agree that I will buy all of my requirements from you this year. Form of a sales contract, you need to remember that contracts for the sale of goods costing $500 or more must be in writing to be enforceable. That will be on the first test, the second test, the third test, the fourth test, and the final exam. Merchant's confirmatory memorandum is one way for you to comply with the statute of frauds if you're dealing with the sale of goods. So let's say you make an oral contract. You make a contract over the phone with another merchant to purchase goods. All you would need to do to satisfy the statute of frauds under Article 2 is to write a merchant's confirmatory memorandum. And if the other merchant receives it and does not object within 10 days, then it's binding on the merchant who received it. All right, so you and I enter into a contract for the sale of goods on the phone. I send you an email and it says, this is just to confirm our telephone conversation today that I agreed to buy XYZ from you. You agreed to supply it by whatever the date is. Now, you receive it. You don't object to its contents within 10 days. It's binding on you as if you had signed it. And then, of course, we have specially manufactured goods exception to the rule. If you have a contract for the sale of goods that should have been in writing and it's not, if you have specially manufactured goods that can't be sold in the ordinary course of business, then an oral contract may be enforced. The example was the Flowers Bakery case. Real quick recap, RP Packaging and Flowers Bakery entered into an oral contract, no written contract. And RP Packaging was to supply over $13,000 worth of cellophane wrappers for Flowers Bakery. RP Packaging sent a mock-up or a sample. Flowers Bakery said, go ahead with it. They produced the cellophane wrappers according to the original specifications. And when Flowers Bakery received them, they said, oops, it doesn't fit. They don't fit. And Flowers Bakery said, well, too bad, RP Packaging. You need to remake them because we didn't have a written contract. It's not enforceable. So in this case, RP Packaging then sued Flowers Bakery, and the court in Virginia held that these are specially manufactured goods. RP Packaging cannot sell them to anyone else, and Flowers Bakery, you have to pay for them. All right, ownership of goods. Under Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code, every time you have the sale of goods, the seller gives the implied warranty of title. So in other words, the seller is saying, I have good title to these goods, and I'm conveying good title to these goods. Now, of course, this implied warranty of title may be disclaimed or taken away with a specific disclaimer. And would you want to buy goods if you were not given the implied warranty of title? And the answer is absolutely not, right? The implied warranty of title may also be disclaimed at a sheriff's sale or a public auction where property has been repossessed. Here's what I want you to remember about the sale of goods by a non-owner. A thief can never pass good title to goods. No exceptions. Thief cannot pass good title to goods. And you only have whatever title your seller had. So if you buy goods from a thief, you don't have good title. If you try to sell those goods, then your purchaser does not have good title. There's an entrustment exception I did want to mention, and this is because Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code, the drafters wanted there to be stability in commercial transactions. And so if you entrust goods to a seller who deals in goods of the kind, and if the seller by mistake sells your goods, then the entrustment exception says the purchaser has good title. And here's the example. And does the customer have good title to the bike in this example? And the answer is yes. Risk of loss rules. Prior to Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code, we simply look to see who has the title to the goods, and that way we'll know who has the risk of loss. Well, that's not how it works under Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code. The risk of loss rules are fairly straightforward. If there is a provision in the contract that says who bears the risk of loss, then that's who has the risk of loss if the goods are damaged or destroyed while they're in transit. That's rule number one. Rule number two is this. If there's been a breach of contract, then the person who has breached the contract has the risk of loss. And that's the Shook versus Graybar case that we talked about in class. In Shook versus Graybar, Shook had ordered reels of aerial cable, and instead had been sent reels of burial cable. And actually, no, Shook had ordered 3 reels of burial cable from Graybar, and Graybar delivered 2 reels of aerial cable, so above the ground cable, and 1 reel of burial cable. Shook notified Graybar that there's a breach of contract and to come and pick up the cable, and Graybar Electric did not come and pick up the cable. 3 months later, the cable was stolen, and Graybar Electric says, too bad, Shook, you have to pay for it. Does Shook have to pay for the stolen cable? And the answer is no. Shipment terms and allocation of risk of loss. Just a couple real simple shipment terms you'll see when you get out into the world of work, and that is FOB stands for free on board, and FOB is a destination contract, and the risk of loss stays on the seller until the goods reach their destination. That is the buyer. FOB, the seller's city, is a shipment contract, and the risk of loss is on the buyer as soon as the goods are loaded onto the truck. If the parties don't specify, this is the default. It's a shipment contract. All right, so what if you have a direct delivery case? If you have a direct delivery case, you have to look to see who the seller is to determine who has the risk of loss. If you have a merchant seller, then the risk of loss only passes to the buyer after the buyer picks up the goods. If you have a non-merchant seller, the risk of loss is on the buyer as soon as there's proper tender of delivery. So here's the example, Ramos versus Wheel Sports. Mr. Ramos went into Wheel Sports and purchased a motorcycle. He paid for it. He got the title to the motorcycle, the keys, but Mr. Ramos says, look, Wheel Sports, I'm going on vacation. I'll be back in 2 weeks. I need to have someone bring me to the dealership to pick up the motorcycle so they can drive my car home. Wheel Sports says, okay. 2 weeks later, Mr. Ramos goes into Wheel Sports, and Wheel Sports says, Mr. Ramos, we're sorry to tell you, but your motorcycle has been stolen. And Mr. Ramos says, well, it's your loss. And they said, oh, we hope you have insurance on it because we didn't. anyway. So who has the risk of loss here? And the risk of loss is on Wheel Sports because they are merchants. If you have a direct delivery case with a non-merchant, the risk of loss is on the buyer as soon as there's proper tender of delivery. In other words, ready, willing, and able. So let's say I'm selling you my motorcycle, it's in my barn, and you come out and you look at it this afternoon and you say, I accept, I want to buy your motorcycle. And you give me the check, I give you the title and the keys, it's gassed up and ready to go. But you tell me that, well, I need to have a ride home, so I'll pick it up tomorrow. Now, I am not a merchant with respect to motorcycles. So tonight, my barn burns to the ground, the motorcycle is destroyed. Who has the risk of loss? And this time, you do, the buyer, has the risk of loss because there's been proper tender of delivery. Sale on approval and sale or return. With a sale on approval, the risk of loss stays on the seller until the end of the approval period or until the buyer accepts the goods. So you need to watch out for sales on approval. So here's the case, Pruitt versus Numismatic Funding. Pruitt entered into a contract to purchase or to look at, to examine approximately $62,000 worth of collectible coins. And so Numismatic Funding sent Mr. Pruitt these coins on a 14-day approval. Mr. Pruitt received the coins, and prior to the expiration of the 14-day approval, Mr. Pruitt notified Numismatic that he was not accepting the coins, and he attempted to send them back. He had no instructions on how to send them back, so he handed the coins over to his wife. She put them in 2 boxes, took them down to the post office, and insured them for the maximum amount. I believe at the time it was $400. And the coins were mailed back to Numismatic Funding. Numismatic Funding never received them. So the question is, who has the risk of loss? Who has to pay? And in this case, since it's a sale on approval and Mr. Pruitt mailed them back prior to the expiration of the approval period, then Numismatic Funding has the risk of loss. Let's talk a little bit about breach of sales contracts. Now, what happens if there's a breach of contract? So today we're going to look at some warranties that a seller may give. We're going to begin with an express warranty and then talk about the implied warranties of merchantability and fitness for a particular purpose. An express warranty may arise through a description of goods. It could also be, I'm selling you a lawnmower and I tell you that this lawnmower is expressly warranted for the next year, parts and labor. That's one way to do it too. But I want you to know that an express warranty may arise through a description of goods. So example, real simple example on this slide. I sell you a ring and it's marked 14 karat gold. You wear the ring for a couple of weeks and it turns your finger green because it is gold-plated brass. Has the seller breached a warranty? Absolutely yes, and that's an express warranty. This is an example of breach of an express warranty. It's out of North Carolina. So the buyer bought an engine to operate his irrigation pump. The label said it would produce 100 horsepower. Buyer needed at least 80. In actual use, the engine only produced 60 horsepower. Is this a breach of an express warranty? Absolutely yes. The implied warranty of merchantability says this, that a seller makes this warranty and it's only given by a merchant seller, and the seller is saying that the goods are good for the ordinary purpose for which they are used. Now, this warranty has been applied in the sale of food or drink, and in Virginia we still follow the naturally present rule, and in North Carolina at the time the Goodman versus Wendy's case was decided initially, they followed the naturally present rule as well. So let me give you a brief description of the naturally present rule. So if the thing that causes a person harm is naturally present in the food, then you're not going to be able to sue for breach of the implied warranty of merchantability. So that is, you're eating a piece of pumpkin pie, how about this? You're eating a piece of pecan pie, and you bite into a shell, a pecan shell. Can you sue for breach of the implied warranty of merchantability? And the answer is no, because pecan shells are ordinarily present when you shell pecans. How about this? You're eating a piece of pumpkin pie and you bite into a piece of glass. Glass is not ordinarily present in pumpkins, so you would be able to sue under the implied warranty of merchantability. All right, so let's consider Goodman versus Wendy's. In this case, Mr. Goodman went into the Wendy's in Hillsborough at lunchtime and he ordered his favorite burger. He bit down onto the burger and he bit into a piece of bone and broke, I believe it was 3 teeth. And he ended up missing a half day from work. It was incredibly painful. He had to have a root canal. He had 1 tooth extracted. And so he contacted Wendy's. And Wendy's said, gosh, it's too bad that happened, but pieces of gristle and hard pieces of bone are naturally present in hamburger meat, so you're not going to be able to sue us and win. Too bad, Mr. Goodman. Well, Mr. Goodman didn't give up. And now, on appeal in North Carolina abandoned the naturally present rule and then adopted the new rule, and this is the majority rule throughout the United States, and that is the reasonable expectations rule. Did Mr. Goodman reasonably expect that when he bit into that burger that he would break 3 teeth? The answer, of course, is no, and so the court then made Wendy's pay for his broken teeth. You know, the implied warranty of merchantability, as I said, is only given by a merchant selling goods that he or she ordinarily sells. This merchant can also disclaim or take away the implied warranty of merchantability. To disclaim the implied warranty of merchantability, you would have to use the term merchantability. So there is no implied warranty of merchantability. It is also disclaimed if goods are sold as is or with all faults. The implied warranty of fitness for a particular purpose is given by any seller, not just a merchant. And so the seller must have reason to know the buyer's special purpose, and the buyer must be relying on the seller's skill and judgment in selecting that product. So here's the example. Let's say that my smart car is for sale for $1,000. And you come to me, and I do not deal in smart cars. But you come to me and you say, I'm interested in buying the smart car, but here's all I want to do with it. I want to be able to haul my John boat, which is a flat-bottom fishing boat, down to the local reservoir so I can go fishing on my days off. And will the smart car haul the John boat? And I say, of course it will. In fact, you buy it from me, you're relying on my skill and judgment, and the smart car only has 3 cylinders. It has an engine about the size of a lawnmower, and you find out very quickly it will not haul your John boat. Have I breached the implied warranty of fitness for a particular purpose? The answer is yes. Strict liability and tort is available in 45 states. It's not yet available in Virginia. To be able to recover for strict liability and tort, the product must in some way be defective. It could be a defect in design, manufacture, packaging, failure to warn or provide adequate instructions. The case we went over in class is the Shoshone Coca-Cola Bottling Company versus Dolinsky. In this case, Mr. Dolinsky worked at the Sea and Ski Factory. On break, he went to the drink machine to purchase a soft drink. In fact, he put his money in, and out comes a squirt in a bottle just like this. It's a soft drink, a yellow soft drink. He chugs the squirt and immediately gets sick because at the bottom of the bottle, there is the carcass of a dead mouse, feces and hair. He sues, and this is a case out of Nevada. Originally, Nevada did not recognize strict liability and tort, but with this case, they recognized it. And so Mr. Dolinsky was able to recover using this as his remedy. Here's some other remedies that you have if you're a buyer. If the buyer is in breach of contract, of course, the seller can cancel the contract. So that's pretty clear. But what if the seller does not deliver conforming goods? What if there's a breach of contract on that end? The buyer can reject all of the goods that have been sent or part. The buyer also has the remedy to do something called cover, a real simple term to buy substitute goods. The buyer can reject those goods, and we're going to look at a case, Black versus Don Schmid Motor Company. And then one remedy that's available to both buyers and sellers is the right to make a written demand for assurances. So if either party to a contract feels like the other party's not going to be able to perform their contractual obligations, you don't have to wait until the date for performance. You can ask for written assurances. And if written assurance is not forthcoming within 30 days, you can treat the contract as repudiated or broken, and then you can purchase substitute goods. Black versus Don Schmid Motor Company. This is a case where an acceptance is revoked. Mr. Black was a salesman, and he bought a 1977 Peugeot that had been driven by a factory rep for 22,967 miles. And the dealer gave Mr. Black a 12-month, 12,000-mile warranty. During the first 5 months, he had any number of problems with this car. He had to take it back numerous times for repairs. In fact, he had to rent a car, and these repairs were never successful. So the accelerator would stick, the transmission leaked, and he had to carry around transmission fluid with him and fill it up daily. The thermostat didn't work. The AC leaked cold water out on the floor when he turned corners. Anyway, he had any number of problems with this car. Finally, he's exasperated, and Mr. Black returns the car to the dealer. The dealer, of course, didn't sit down and write him a check, oh, yeah, here's your money back. He had to sue, and the court held that a buyer may revoke acceptance within a reasonable amount of time, and here the court held this was reasonable. And then that other remedy that I referred to that's available to both buyers and sellers, that right to make a written demand for assurances, here would be an example. So if either the buyer or the seller feels insecure, you may make a written demand for assurances, and if assurance isn't forthcoming within 30 days, you can treat the contract as broken or repudiated. Walden Mills. This was kind of a sad case. Walden Mills was a textile factory in Lawrence, Massachusetts. They made Polartec, and this was the heart of the community, and it burned down. And the mill owner decided to rebuild it, even though he was very old at the time of the fire and really didn't have any heirs. He decided to rebuild it because it was such an important part of the community. And so this was an uncommon display of generosity. All right, so here's your hypothetical. Let's say that you manufacture coats and you have just heard of this terrible fire. You can contact the owner of the mill and say, you know, I know you're supposed to deliver these goods to me on December the 1st, and you've had this terrible fire. I'm terribly sorry to hear about that. But will you be able to honor your contract? Now, if you don't hear within 30 days, then you can treat the contract as if it had been repudiated, and now you can go out and make a substitute contract to purchase fabric from someplace else. And then finally, every contract for the sale of goods has implied this obligation of good faith. And good faith is honesty in fact, which brings me to a good example of perhaps lack of good faith, and that's Umlaas versus AC Oldsmobile. Umlaas versus AC Oldsmobile. Mr. Umlaas went into AC Oldsmobile and ordered a new car. He was so excited about this new car. And so initially, the salesperson gave him a $650 trade-in on his old car. But the contract said that the dealership had the right to reappraise the car when the new car arrived. So this makes sense, right? Because perhaps Mr. Umlaas would get into an accident, maybe there would be mechanical problems. Anyway, Mr. Umlaas a couple months later receives a call. Guess what your new car is in? He goes down to the dealer, and the dealer says, all right, we need to reappraise your trade-in. And they do an appraisal of the trade-in, and the person comes back and says, we'll give you $50 for your trade-in. And Mr. Umlaas says, what? They said $50, and they admitted that the car was worth between $300 and $400, but their contract said that they could do a reappraisal, and they reappraised it at $50. Mr. Umlaas then sues. So is this a good faith contract? So good faith is implied in every contract for the sale of goods. Was Mr. Umlaas able to recover from AC Oldsmobile? And the answer is yes. And so that's a summary of sales, and this is the end of the materials for the first test. So take care.